Title: Static. Written by Kawaii Deku. Today's occurrence was not the first of its kind by any means. Is this the third time now? No, it's the fourth, I think. The first time we only recognized as an incident later on. In the moment, you had thought nothing of it. The shock itself was so light you assumed it was a normal static from her clothes. In fact, you had even apologized to Zenitsu for shocking him. The second time was when you actually took notice. You recall a verbal dispute unfolding between yourself and Inosuke, though it still remains unclear to you what exactly incited the argument. Somehow, Zenitsu became the center focus of it. In the heat of the moment, the brash teen tossed out a careless insult as he tends to do, and you were quick to defend the sensitive blonde from it. The last thing you remember was plopping your hands into his golden locks to punctuate your viewpoint since he was actually sitting in the room, when Inosuke's mouth started firing with a loud crackle, following by a spark of light erupted from beneath your palm. It hardly hurt, but the sharp popping sound was startling to say the least. Zenitsu himself even looked around for the source, having no idea that it had come from him. The next one was more robust than its predecessors. A few days ago, the two of you decided to eat lunch outside before he gushed over how romantic picnics are. Tanjiro was there as well, perched mere feet away on a rock next to the koi pond. But Zenitsu seemed content to ignore him and treat it like a date anyway. Perhaps it was instant karma for making Tanjiro feel unwelcome, but it was then that Inosuke, being the agent of chaos he was, came tumbling across the food spread, snatching Zenitsu's dessert right off the blanket. He took no time in vocalizing his complaint, but it wasn't enough to stop the green-eyed delicate from gobbling it anyway, leaving your companion to pout in frustration. Here, you held up the bowl quickly, knowing that Tanjiro would have offered his own if you didn't speak up fast enough. Zenitsu held up a hand in refusal. I couldn't take yours. Oh, I insist. I don't really like Anmitsu anyways. He shrugged and he blinked at you. You know, the pitch of your voice changes when you lie. Right at the end there. His comment seemed to hold no accusations. It was strictly observatory in nature. Almost like he was taking a mental note of. He shot a loaded glance over to Tanjiro. If his raised eyebrows were any indication, that remark struck him as odd too. Zenitsu usually allowed his wishful thinking to get the better of him and override his keen senses, but it seemed as though he could read you easily when he wanted to. Want to share? You offered as a compromise and he nodded twice. Then open up. You scooped up a generous helping of the sweet onto the spoon. Zenitsu blushed and obeyed, leaning forward to give you easier access. Things seemed fine when his mouth closed around the utensil, but then he looked up. With a mouthful of food, his unguarded blue-eyed expression was amusing, and Zenitsu watched your lips tug into a genuine smile. He felt the involuntary warning pull on his heartstrings, and he tried to pull away, but not before. This time, the tension was harsh, and the pain shot all the way up to your elbow. You reflexively dropped the metal spoon and it hit the glass bowl with a clang. Tanjiro stared on in fascination. Since these incidents only seemed to be increasing in frequency and strength, after today you had to wonder how many more times it would take before the intensity of the blast would be enough to zap you into matching hair colors with him. Wouldn't that be something? You mused to yourself, smirking at the ridiculous notion. Though you have to admit, these episodes did seem to be getting worse lately. But then again, today it had an accidental vector to enhance its current, so it was hard to be completely sure. Perhaps it just felt stronger because your hands were wet. Zenitsu had been hiding since he shocked you this morning. You were certain of it. The grounds were not that fast. Not to mention, he generally sought out your presence, so it was highly unusual not to see him. You couldn't really blame him though. Girls had smacked him around for far less in the past. The afternoon felt oddly lonely without his attentive eyes on you, his bubbly conversation flickering between your ears as he hot-footed around you in a circular pattern reminiscent of a planet in orbit. He couldn't avoid you forever, though, since the four of you always ate dinner together. The mild pain in your hands had all but ebbed by the time you made your way inside. The three boys were already sitting there when you slid the panel open. Zenitsu's posture visibly shrank in fear when your voice greeted the lot, and he froze completely when your gaze fell upon him. You sat down into the open spot between him and Tanjiro, and Zenitsu's eyes widened. You couldn't suppress a delighted smile that threatened to tear your face in half, and you watched the ease sink back into his demeanor. "See? I told you she wasn't mad at you." Tanjiro stated warmly, which resulted into the blunt flashing you a crooked grin before digging onto his food. As you chewed your food and listened to the boys trade dinner conversations, little thoughts began creeping in, and you couldn't help but entertain them. The odd escapades happening over the last few days were kind of cute, weren't they? Talk about reaching a new level of wearing your heart on your sleeve, which Zenitsu already did in the first place. As if that open facet of him wasn't enduring enough, he somehow managed to cultivate a little spark of joy whenever he felt it, though calling it spark would be underselling its magnitude. Part of you had to feel bad for the poor thing having this inconvenience but undeniably adorable affliction, but another, obviously more twisted side of you was already contemplating new things to say to set it off again. You couldn't quite explain this desire, but there was just something intimate about it. In these moments, you possessed a power comparable to his own mighty hearing or Tanjiro's keen sense of smell. Just like you could no longer mask the truth from him, in those sparks reside a matching vulnerability. When he couldn't hide his innermost feelings from you, only then did you experience his emotions at their most unguarded, when he was the most Zenitsu. "What's on your mind, YN?" Tanjiro's voice snapped you out of your reverie. You kept smiling to yourself. "Oh, you noticed Zenitsu watching you curiously as well, and you felt the heat rise in your face. I just remembered something cute that happened when I went into the town yesterday. I heard a little girl ask her mother if wheels on cars get dizzy from spinning around all the time." Wow, you had just utterly pulled that story right out of your posterior. Why you did it, you had no idea. You were well aware by now that Zenitsu could distinguish your lies and Tanjiro could sniff them out. I'm such an airhead. You mumbled to yourself when the realization struck. Tanjiro giggled at the blank look on your face. "It's okay, YN. You don't have to tell us. I was just curious." You narrowed your eyes at him. "Don't give me that look, Tanjiro." He knew exactly what you were thinking, and by the uncharacteristically mischievous smile he was wearing, he wanted you to know that he knew. "Oh, dark already, huh?" Inosuke, entirely clueless to all the subtext at the table, flopped onto his back and patted his full stomach. "Man, I was hoping to trade some more today. If you want, I can wake you up early and we can get a head start on tomorrow's training." Tanjiro offered, scooping up some of the used dish at the table. "Aren't you guys supposed to be resting?" You chided casually. Well, extra oxygen helps with the healing process. Isn't that right, Inosuke?" The boarhead bobbed up and down in response to Tanjiro's question. Excuses, excuses." You shook your head and Zenitsu smiled at your motherly tone. After you gathered the remaining dishes in your arms, you and Tanjiro walked off to the kitchen together to wash them. Now that it was just you and he alone, the silence was stifling. "And don't say anything, Tanjiro. Please." You cut him off immediately, channeling your frustration into scrubbing. "I don't know what you are talking about," he teased lightly, and you pursed your lips in annoyance. He returned your salty expression with a warm one. "But I will say this. Most people appreciate honesty, especially genuine people." You let out a sigh. You couldn't be irritated. That was actually pretty good advice. But it was advice you had absolutely no intention of following. Upon returning to the room, you observed that the table was gone and the futons had come out. The moon was shining through the open doors and dark blue painted the pond and gardens. "Nezuko-chan." You and Tanjiro sat and watched Zenitsu tapping gently on the box with one finger. "Wake up, it's nighttime." A moment of expectation hung in the air before the box swung open. On your left, you saw Tanjiro giving him the side eye of a protective brother. reminding him to behave. The small girl emerged, ebony hair flowing like a river behind her. Hi, Nezuko-chan. Zenitsu code. Did you sleep well? Did you dream of me? Those are called nightmares. Inosuke scolded him flatly, and Zenitsu's lips curled in displeasure. Nezuko ignored the bickering and greeted the blonde with a genial pat on the head. He clenched her teeth in anticipation when he smiled wide and a pink blush dusted his cheeks. But then, no sparks. He frowned and knitted her eyebrows. Something wrong? The initiative Tanjiro picked up on your mood changed immediately. You jealous? Inosuke elbowed you in the ribs from the other side. It appeared that he was not as clueless at dinner as you had thought. For a hot second, you almost lost your composure but managed to pull yourself back. Yes, I am, actually. You curled forwards towards the box. I want head pats too, Nezuko. That's not what I meant, he ingrate. He was clearly dissatisfied that his attempt to embarrass you had failed. A blush found its way to your face anyway, since you knew Tanjiro was right behind you, buying none of it. You quickly buried it into the corner in front of her, and felt a hand rest on your head. You weren't sure how you knew, but every eye in the room was certainly fixed, and you could feel yourself sinking into the floor as each peer bore into you.